Thank you very much, Chair. Look, I think it's positive that we have this time to discuss the Amnesty International report and the situation in Israel and Palestine. The Amnesty report has detailed a cruel system of control over Palestinians by Israel. Palestinians left impoverished in a constant state of fear and anxiety. The report itself ultimately concludes that this occupation and control meets the definition of apartheid under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and under the United Nations Anti-Apartheid Convention. And while there has been much attempt to discredit this report, it needs to be looked at in the context of the Human Rights Watch report, a report that talked about the oppression of Palestinians, saying it has reached a threshold and a permanence that meets the definition of crimes of apartheid and persecution. And again, even before the Human Rights Watch report, we had the report from B'Tselem, the Israeli NGO, who said that there is one organising principle that lies at the base of a wide array of Israeli policies, advancing and perpetuating the supremacy of one group over another. And the thing is, these reports don't come out of anywhere. We've been hearing this for a long time. There are many other reports highlighting this embedded, entrenched institutional discrimination. Breaking the Silence have regularly reported about the testimony of soldiers talking about how they ignore the crimes of settlers and will arrest Palestinians. How settlers throw stones and assault Palestinians and the soldiers ignore them while they're arresting the Palestinians for doing the same thing or for even doing nothing. BIMCOM, the Israeli NGO of Planners for Human Rights, have regularly spoken out about the entrenched racism in the Israeli planning system, particularly when it comes to the administration of the occupied Palestine. The Association of Civil Rights in Israel have spoken out against racist laws and laws that are applied unevenly depending on whether you are Israeli or Palestinian. They've detailed in the past at least 50 laws, if not more, that have that entrenched discrimination on the statute books. The NGO Badil talks a lot about the Palestinian refugees' right of return and how this is enshrined in international law. But compare that with a right of return that has been utterly ignored. Compare that to the law of return and how anyone seeking to make aliyah to move to Israel can return, and the discrimination entrenched in that. And like many other people in this House, I've seen this discrimination firsthand. I've stood on the rubble of a Palestinian home that was demolished. Not just was the home demolished, but they were given a tent. The family were given a tent by the Red Cross. And because the tent was pitched on the same piece of property, it was considered a building, and the Israelis came and demolished the tent the Red Cross had given them. And while I stood there on the rubble of this house, I could look over across a settler-only road, across the separation barrier, to a hill opposite, where there was an illegal outpost of the settlement of Nevi Daniel. This was an illegal outpost, not just illegal in the way we talk about settlements being illegal in terms of international law, which they are and which you recognise, Minister, but even illegal under Israeli law. And this settlement, this outpost, was never going to be demolished. So here we have a Palestinian home that is demolished and 100 yards away an Israeli home that will never be demolished. What is that if not entrenched legal discrimination? I stood there, and as I stood there, you could see the cars on the settler-only road flying into Israel, where just up the road from us was a checkpoint, choked with Palestinians struggling to get through, struggling to get in to get some work, to earn some money, to feed their impoverished families, as the Amnesty report says. I've seen the settlers throwing stones at Palestinians, assaulting Palestinians, and soldiers doing nothing. And all that Palestinian has to do is look at the settler wrong, and they're getting arrested. Exactly as the BT Breaking the Silence report has said. I visited Ida refugee camp, Al-Dahisha refugee camp. I've seen the refugees denied their international law rights of a right of return to their homes. Again, this entrenched legal discrimination. And all of that adds up to apartheid. Not just that, but what we see in Israel's policies towards the Palestinians is ultimately a deliberate inflicting on Palestinians of a way of life calculated to essentially bring about their destruction, in part, bring about the destruction of Palestinian communities. That's what we are ultimately witnessing here. And we've seen an attempt at a rebuttal within this complex. We've seen an attempt at a rebuttal of the Amnesty International report. And all we heard was the same regurgitation of the same tired, debunked Hasbara, the same lies that are told to justify the occupation. Indeed, the crushing reality of the occupation never got a look in. The settlement building, the wall, the checkpoints, the home demolitions, the random arrests, the ID cards, the arbitrary nature of all of this kind of administration of the occupied Palestinian territories. None of that got looked in. All we got was the same tired Hasbara that is just has all been debunked before. And to listen to it was infuriating. If international law is to be real, we must find a way to enforce it, to allow one state to act with impunity, emboldens others to do the same. And we've seen it in the last few weeks in relation to Ukraine. But also we see it in Western Sahara, with the Moroccan occupation there, who know they can get away with it because they know their friends in Israel are getting away with it. And it just simply, if we allow it anywhere, the breach of international law to happen anywhere, it becomes an insipid cancer that eats away at peace and prosperity everywhere. And Palestinians are looking on, and they are looking on hurt and confused and wanting to know why they are different and why they are not getting the same response. You know, I spoke to one Palestinian during the week, and the hurt was palpable as they spoke about this. You know, and we need to ensure that the ICC is being strengthened, and the ICC is it can act on this, and that we are supporting that and fighting against that. But what's the use in that as well? Because, like, look, if we go back to the Goldstone report, you know, which detailed strongly the concerns that there are in relation to breaches of international law, and again, nothing happened. So it is deeply, deeply infuriating. We need to find ways to enforce our commitments under the Geneva Convention. Deputy Haughey here earlier talked about recognition. And Minister, I know you've spoken about recognition and saying, you know, we have the most leverage with the threat of recognition before we actually do it. But what leverage are we getting? All I see is the Israelis acting with impunity and ignoring what the world says. So if we're not getting any leverage out of it, what's the benefit to it? And if in terms of the cost of recognition, well, let's look at what happened to Sweden when they recognised Palestine. Nothing. They faced no diplomatic. There was a few angry press releases and some people returning IKEA furniture, but certainly, well, in my conversations with members of the Department of Foreign Affairs in Sweden, they told me that they had no problem. They faced no restrictions. This is what the Department of Foreign Affairs in Sweden told me, Minister, that they faced no problems in terms of their programmes within Palestine after the recognition. IKEA may have had some furniture returned, that was about it. So, you know, if we're not getting leverage from it, if there's not going to be a cost from it, surely this is one small symbolic act we can do to support the Palestinians. We do recognise that we've all stood together here in this House to recognise annexation, to call it out as the annexation is happening there, which is a crime in terms of international law. You have spoken out in the past, Minister, about the settlements being illegal and being a breach of international law. So we have these criminal enterprises that are happening. If a company here was engaged in criminal enterprises, would we allow them to bid for government contracts? And yet we have companies that are engaged in criminal enterprises over there that are bidding for government contracts here. And there's just a disconnect there. Surely we should be saying that anyone involved in a criminal enterprise, whether it is here on a domestic level or whether it is an international level, should not be getting government contracts. I share the frustration of Deputy Boyd Barrett. This is a deeply frustrating and upsetting subject. And I'm conscious that I'm standing here in a very safe, privileged place, while right now there are many Palestinians whose homes are probably being raided, who are probably being arrested, who are living under that occupation. And it's just, we need to find ways to do more, because what we are doing right now is not enough. And the occupation is not just continuing, it is grinding on, and it is grinding down, and it is becoming more and more and more entrenched. And the lives of Palestinians are being destroyed as a result. Thank you.